Dasyangana gana sarakya chaksurun miritam yana tashmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Shtapitam yana bhutare Sayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sita Parakamadam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Stam Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Ganitam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam
Shri
Parijana
Gurave Namaha.
Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Ladita Shri Vishikanvitam Stam Om Ganati Mananda Shankarangana Sarakya Jaksurun Militam Yanatashmai Shri Gurave Namaha Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Dev Maheshwara Guru Shaksha Parabrahma Tashmai Shri Gurave Namaha Durgame Patimi Andasha Skalipate Katemaru Sakripaya Sinantaru Santu Santu Visanambanam Mukam Kabit Bakare An Shabara Panga Gilanga Deke Karigane Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinu Bandhu Jigapate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Jayatam Sarito Pango Mama Madhya Matergati Matsavasha Paramboja Radha Madhanamoram Siman Rasa Rasaram Bi Vamsi Pada Karsan Penashunar Bigi Gopinata Sri Esaram Divyad Brindaranya Kapadrumada Srimad Radnagara Shima Shanishto Sri Siddhara Shida Govinda Deva Prestadavi Seva Manushmarami Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanya Taya Cha Jagati Taya Krishnaya Govinaya Namo Namah Mangalam Bhagavan Vishnu Mangaram Gururajajam Mangaram Panurikaksham Mangarayatanu Om Narayanaya Vidmahi Vasadevaya Dhimahi Tano Vishnu Pachedehe Om Mahadevi Cha Vidmahi Vishnu Paditadimi Tano Lakshmi Prachodhyate Mahalakshmi Namastabhyam Sare Sare Hari Praya Namastabhyam Namastabhyam Dayadire Idam Bhagavatam Nama Parana Paramesamitam Uttamashokicharitam Chakarandashi Nishriyasha Lokasha Danyam Shastira Maha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Siddhi Gaur Bhaktavindam. Thanks for joining us, Manasa Ganga. Brent, thank you for your Haribo by Bobby's 3 flowers there on Facebook. John Malik with a Haribo, and Jean with some musical notes, some pranams, as well as a heart. And we've got Rob with us here on the Zoom channel as well. We're in the 22nd verse, the 9th chapter of the first Bhagavatam. We're in Bhisma, lying on the bed of Eros, says, Tatapi ekanta bhaktishu bashe bhupana yanme shun shajita Krishna darshanamagata. He's feeling himself unlimitedly fortunate, uniquely fortunate, because at the time of leaving his body, according to his request, Tribhuvanam tamalam kamadavaram ravi karam karam barade bapuralakakare vijaya shakar ashtu mena bhaja. His most heartfelt desire, the culmination of an entire life without even a tinge of selfishness, an entirely selfless life lived by Bhisma Dev to guide, to mentor, to benefact 4 generations of Kauravas. That life is now coming to an end. That sun, which was Bhisma, is now in the process of setting. He's surrounded by great saints and sages, including the Pandavas and Lord Krishna himself. And his most fond desire, the only thing that he asked for 256 years of service to others, is that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of God, had come before him at the time of death. And that request was happily granted by the Lord. Why? There were many, many soldiers who lost their lives in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And actually it is said, it is his Sitapi Chanya, not Tatami Chaka, Nara Loka Virya, Hatpa Krishna Mukara Vindaram, Pibanti Netram Nayana Biravaram, Partashtu Putam Padam Mashusha. It does say that the soldiers who lost their lives on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Hatpa Krishna Mukara Vindaya, they were seeing the form of Krishna driving Arjuna's chariot there on the battle of Kurukshetra as they left their bodies. And in that moment of quitting their material bodies, when the soul and the body go their separate ways, Their eyes, pibantri, netram, naya, barabaram. Their eyes were experiencing the perfection of vision by seeing Krishna at the time of leaving their bodies. In fact, what to speak of seeing Krishna? It is said Krishna and the devotee are the same. You see the devotee, you're seeing Krishna. This unique circumstances of the Kurukshetra war, where that you're seeing Krishna and the devotee, Arjuna, on the same chariot. Otherwise, you see the devotee, it's considered to be as good as seeing Krishna. The devotees walk, traverse the world as the bona fide, authorized, empowered representatives of the Lord. But here is a convergence, once in a millennium, once in a cosmic season, convergence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotee on the same chariot. And those warriors who are fortunate enough to have left their lives on that battlefield, it is said that they achieved liberation. And yet, Krishna's taking the time to personally appear and exhibit his beautiful form with color like the lightning cloud, like the cloud, his dhoti like the lightning which flashes within the cloud, his Vajanti garland with bees humming around, his reddish lips like bimba fruit, his raven dark hair, and his enchanting, lovely smile. Shmeran Bangi Treya Parchitam Sachi Vishtanam. That smile which steals the hearts of all living beings away from the attractions of family, friendship, and love. The Lord, in order to fulfill the innermost heart's desire of Bhisma, his unflinching devotee, appeared before him at the hour of his death. Bhisma is echoing the words of the Bhagavad Gita, Samaham Sarvabhutashu Name Dveshya Ye Bhajanti Ma Nai Teshu Teshu Chapiham. Krishna says, Samaham Sarvabhutashu. I am equal to all. Neither am I a friend to some, nor am I an enemy to others. And yet, at the same time, I have special affection for my unflinching devotees of the Lord. In the third canto of the Bhagavatam, Lord Brahma says, Evam haro bhagati pratilabda bhava bhaktadravjadu para avkantya bhashpa karya takchapi chara barisham shanirvya. Says that mind of the devotee, which unflinchingly and undeviatingly meditates on the lotus feet of the Lord, dedicates all of one's thoughts and actions and wealth in the service of the Lord, that aroma, that consciousness of the pure devotee acts like bait for a fish. It's a lure on the end of the hook, which is such an expertly tied and presented lure that the fish cannot resist that lure. Fish knows, especially a bigger, older, wiser fish, he knows what's there in the water. He's been living within a certain body of water for a long period of time. Some fish, the koi in our lake, literally are said to live for hundreds and hundreds of years. So he knows everything that's going on. He knows every fly, he knows every ripple. But one day this lure drops in to his reservoir of water. He's never seen anything like it before. It's tied to a string, which has to be very curious in itself, and it's moving around in a very attractive way. So he knows something's wrong with this picture. And yet the lure itself is so appealing and attractive that in spite of all his tendencies to avoid it, he hits that lure. He can't keep himself away from the Lord. So the Lord is impartial, equally disposed to all living beings, and yet he cannot resist being attracted to that pure, fresh, selfless consciousness of a pure devotee. Example is given, the king has a responsibility to all of his subjects, provide them with food, shelter, housing, education, keep them safe from the criminal elements. King treats all of his subjects without any discrimination. He's like a father who loves all of his sons. And yet, in spite of that, and this does not violate his principle of neutrality or impartiality, in spite of that, the king has special affection for his own son. He regards all the citizens with affection. He discharges his duties scrupulously towards each and every one of the citizens. Not one citizen will have any call to criticize the king for being derelict in his duty. Just consider the case of Lord Ram. Lord Ram was wandering about Ayodhya one day in disguise after he'd returned from having rescued Sita, and he heard some washerman from within his house upbraiding his wife. Nahambi barmi tram dushtam asatim parave stinihar brahmo naham vajaypara. He said, Ram may take his wife back after she has been in the house of another man, but I am not handpecked like Ram. I will not take you back. Get out. When Ram heard that explicit criticism of himself, then as painful as it was, he sent Sita to the forest, pregnant, in fact, with 2 sons. Seems like a drastic thing to do. It seems like, based on a frivolous, irresponsible statement of the washerman who, if he'd known Ram had heard it, he would have taken it back and prostrated and apologized himself. Why did Ram go to such extremes? Because his number one duty as the king was to the citizens, just like the duty of a father is to their sons. And no son or daughter should have any cause to criticize the father for being derelict in his duty. And so even with the hint of impropriety, Ram took the steps in order to remove any possible critical elements. Similarly, Krishna dedicates himself to all living beings. None of us lack for shelter, for food, for raw materials, for engagement, for employment, for family, for friends. None of us lack for any of those things. If there is any such lack, it's man-created, it's not God-created. Otherwise, God is so generous and open-handed that he gives 10 times the food, the shelter, the raw materials that we need in order to maintain ourselves adequately. And yet, in spite of all of that, the king will go out of his way. He'll do special services for his own sons. And so it is that Krishna appears as a donation, as a gift. Krishna presents himself before Bhisma at the time of leaving his body. And the reason is that Bhisma, his consciousness is of such a pure, fresh nature, selfless nature, that Krishna can no longer more resist it than the king can resist, than the fish can resist the hook. We mentioned last week how Prabhupada, our spiritual master, came to Australia in 1971 for the first time. He only stayed for 4 days. I was more or less in charge and spent the bulk of that time with him, with the exception of when he was sleeping. I believe who had come with him, Bhagavan came with him. It was perhaps Shaima Sundar, that first visit. What I noted about Prabhupada was that every single moment, every waking moment, and probably even when he was sleeping, he was serving others. Didn't take any time for himself, never asked us to leave the room so that he could have some privacy, never kicked back and talked about politics or current events. Everything that came from Prabhupada's mouth was from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Every word, every impulse, every emotion, every sentiment went towards Krishna. And when you were in the presence of Prabhupada, it was non-different than being in the presence of Krishna. This is characteristic of devotees, that their whole life is spent serving others. And when Krishna sees one of his children serving the other children, trying his or her mightiest to bring them back to the shelter of Krishna's lotus feet, that captures the heart of the parent like nothing else. Imagine if you help some young boy who's living on the streets, taking drugs. You show some kindness to that boy. You bring them to some sort of a shelter. You feed them. You preach to them. You get them back on their feet. You free them from their addiction. And then you present them to their dad. Finally, you say, where do you live? Where are you from? They give you the address. You give them a ride. You buy them a plane ticket back home. And they appear whole and healthy and restored on the hearth of their father. Can you imagine what the Father will not do for you? You have rehabilitated, you have resurrected, you have rescued his own son. And considering that, what will the Father not do for you? So for those who dedicate their lives selflessly for the service of others, for the rehabilitation and upliftment of others, there is nothing that the Lord will not sacrifice for them, because they have sacrificed for the children, the parts and parcels of the Lord. The Lord holds nothing back in terms of reciprocation for them. There is also a parallel story of Ambarish giving of his life for others. Durvasa Muni had misunderstood some of Ambarish's actions, invoked a weapon to kill Ambarish. Ambarish stood mildly by with folded hands, preparing to accept his own demise at the agency of this fiery weapon Durvasa had launched at him. And yet the Lord, who promises he never disregards, he never abandons the selfless devotees of the Lord, sent his own Sudarshan chakra, which destroyed the fire weapon of Durvasa, and moreover, it began chasing Durvasa all over the universe. And as Ambarish was left standing there alone, Durvasa, having left the scene in extremis, it's interesting because the first thing that Ambarish does is pray for the deliverance of Durvasa Muni, who just tried to kill him. Yadimam Bhagavan Priti Eka Sarvakshanam Sarva Gunagana Bhavinam Dvijo Bhavata Vidvataham. Ambarish makes this prayer to the Supreme Personality of God. Yadi no Bhagavan Prita. If we have done anything that's pleased you, my dear Lord, Yadi no Bhagavan Prita, Eka Sarva Ganashanam, you who are the reservoir of all good qualities, the topmost of which, the crest jewel of all qualities, is mercy and forgiveness. Eka Sarva Ganashanam, Sarva Guna Ganashveshu. Then please Dvijat Bhavito Vidvataham. Please bring relief to this Brahmin who's flying here and there and everywhere. Tadabhidvada Uksha, Shvapresham, Durvasadito, Dikshu Pranapripsha, Bhikshu and Dikshu. Ambarish was flying here and there in all directions, going to Brahma Loka, going to Shiva Loka, going to Vishnu Loka. He was also Bitu. He was terrified. He was shot through with fear and fear. Ambarish prayed, may the cause of his fear, may the cause of his terror be removed, and may he be freed, released from having to flee here and there in order to save himself from the Sudarsana chakra. Now, how many people would have prayed for the forgiveness of their enemies and for the relief of their suffering? Most people would be saying, they would be cheering on the chakra. Go, chakra, get him, get him, get him. Show him. It'll serve him right. He's going to get what he deserves. Devotees have exactly the opposite reactions towards such maldoers as Durvasa Muni. Durvasa Muni finally had to admit that there are no living entities like the devotees. Aho Ananta Dasanam. Dasanam means devotees. Ananta is unlimited qualities of devotees. Mahatvam Drishtam Ajame. Durvasa is speaking from first person singular experience. He says, I have seen it. Mahatvam Drishtam Ajame. With my own eyes, I have seen that in spite of the fact that due to a misunderstanding, due to an overreaction, due to a maliciousness, a condemnable maliciousness and tendency to judge and to criticize others on my part, though I was rotten in this sense in my very core, and therefore tried to take the life of the innocent and faultless Ambarish, and yet he reacted not at all in kind. His reaction was, Krita Shashu Yad Rajan, though I tried to harm him, Mangalani Samiyashe, as intensely and as maliciously and as concentratedly as I tried to harm him. That's what I was sending his way. He, with equal intensity, with equal feeling, with equal concentration, is wishing back towards me relief from suffering, auspicity, prosperity, and total forgiveness. And no wonder then that Tervas, aho is an exclamation. It is a something that one says when one is amazed. Aho dasanamantanam, that the unlimited Lord Vishnu has gone to this extreme to protect his devotee, and now I see exactly why and how it is that the Lord is up like this with his devotees, and the devotees are like this with the Lord. Nobody else can enjoy such a privileged position in the association with the Lord. Lord Jesus also, who sacrificed everything for others on behalf of the Lord, he talked repeatedly about having his position on the right-hand side of the Father. The devotees are the arms and legs. The devotees are the instruments of the Lord. Yashamritam yasha shavana sadyapanadi jagat. So hamba babishud chindam shabahu pradikula vitim. After the doorkeepers, Jai and Vijay, had cursed, after the four Kumars had cursed the two doorkeepers to go to the material world, Krishna came out, he appeared on the scene, and initially he struck the four Kumars with fear with this statement. He said, Yashamitam Yashamara Sajapanadita Shohamba Badbira Chindam Shapahupatikul. He said to the four Kumaras, it's not a very good policy to go around cursing my personal servants. He said, if someone insults a dear devotee of mine who's engaged in my selfless devotional service, then what he's actually saying is, if I some or other were to have insulted my own devotee, I would cut off the arm that insulted him. If one of my arms did something which was offensive towards a devotee, I would rectify that offense by cutting off my arm. When the Kumars heard that, they said, we really went out on a limb with this one. But then Krishna pacified them. After all, they are pure devotees as well. And he said, Eto saro ta gatim pradipadi. He said, don't worry. Your having offended my devotees was according to my arrangement. I wanted them to precede me to the material world to take birth as demons so that I can enjoy pastimes of chivalry with them. And of course, as we know, they took birth as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. They took birth as Sisupal and Dhanukasura and Kumbhakarna and Ravana, and then again as Jagai and Madai on a fourth occasion. It's not surprising, considering the statements of Durvasa, considering the mild, beneficent behavior of Ambarish, that the Lord considers himself incomplete. He considers his whole spiritual realm as barren and vacant without the presence of devotees. He asserts this himself in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavatam, when Durvasa comes to Vaikuntha to appeal to the Lord to cause the Sudarsana chakra to back down. The Lord says, I have no power to cause the Sudarshana chakra to back down. You're going to have to go to my devotee. Devotees are my heart. I am in the heart of my devotees. I cannot act independently from my devotees. This chakra was released on behalf of Maharaj Ambarish, and it is only by the word of Maharaj Ambarish that this chakra will be retracted. So important are my devotees to me, he says to Durvasa Muni, Naham Atmapanam Asase Mad Bhaktir Sadavavina. My resplendent Vaikuntha spiritual world would be of no interest to me where they're not devotees present, where they're not sadhus present. Sriyam Chatika Brahmam Yesham Gatiraham Prapam. I have no desire to enjoy the opulences of the spiritual world without the presence of my devotees who have achieved the highest destination which it is possible for the living being to achieve: pure, selfless, devotional service to the Lord. Devotees give up their lives, they give up their homes. They, in the case of the gopis, they give up their husband, they give up their children, they give up social conventions, hitba, dure, dava, takur, dharma, antikam, dekor. They crossed over all the bridges and all the borders and all the limits of social conventions in order to appear along with me in the middle of the night to enjoy the rasa dance, responding to the call of my flute. And in the face of such selfless giving, selfless sacrifice, how could I possibly give up such devotees either in this life or in the next? Such devotees have captured me. And he gives this, Vase Korvanti Mam Bhaktya Sat Sriyam Satpatampati. Example that Krishna himself gives here in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavatam to Durvasa Muni. Sat Sriyam Chantikam Yat Tat Sat Sriyam Sat Priyam Chitaha. Just like a chaste, faithful, loving wife brings her husband under control by service, by sweet words, by devotion, by her service and by her love, she captures the heart of that husband. Or that husband, even if he's away, even if he's in some distant land on a business trip, his thoughts are only back home at hearth and home where his wife is. Whatever his activities are, however far he may have to wander in order to provide a living or to execute his career, his heart is always back home where his sweet wife is living. He never thinks of anything but his wife. And similarly, Krishna, Paritanaya sadhanam vinashachadishkanam dharma samstapani, he appeared to curb the miscreants and to protect the devotees. He spent the first, 10, 11 years of his life in his own intimate, self-created spiritual realm, Gokula Vrindavan, which was an exact replica of his abode in the spiritual world, Goloka Vrindavan. He was with his eternal parents, Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj, with his eternal cowherd boyfriends, with his eternal associate Radharani and her eternal cowherd maidens. This is Krishna's home. Gokulaka Matmabhutha. Krishna never sets foot outside of Vrindavan. And yet, in order to kill Kamsa, and beyond that, Jarasandha and Sisupal and all the demons who threatened the peace and tranquility of Vrindavan, Krishna left Vrindavan, went to Mathura, and then in furthering his mission of killing the miscreants and protecting the devotees, he eventually had to build his big fort in Dwarka. And historically speaking, on one level, he never made it back to Vrindavan. As his devotees give up everything for the service of the Lord with an attitude of complete selflessness, the Lord gave up on his earthly pastimes, Vrindavan, his eternal associates, his mother and father Yashoda, and he sacrificed his own peace and his own well-being in order to protect others. And this is the common characteristic which is prevalent. Like two threads make up a quilt. The thread which makes up the quilt of the spiritual world is selfless sacrifice for the benefit of others. Yan Raja Manam Survaiva Sarvato. What all the inhabitants of resplendent, self-illuminated spiritual planets have in common is that they sacrifice their lives 100% for the service of others. Therefore, it is said by Bhishma on his dying bed that although it appears to be an irony, although it appears to be a paradox, for those who are unflinching devotees of the Lord, there are those who can claim the fathership by birth, but who don't particularly care for the Father, don't particularly serve the Father. And then there are those who are offspring not only by birth, but by mentality, but by thinking, but by willing, but by feeling. Those obviously have a special place in the heart of the Father. So there are sons of God, and then there are sons of God. Imagine, crude example, as a little leaguer, you had a game with a neighboring city, and 8 members of the team played an okay game. You know, they got on base, they scored here and there, you beat the opponent. But there was one member of the team, he got on base every time. He stole bases, he talked it up, fired in there, shove her down her, go. He talked up he jumped up and down. He lent energy to other teammates. He caught a fly ball that he shouldn't have caught. He threw someone out at first base with an absolutely amazing throw. He went 150%. So in the huddle after the game, the coach says, John, good game. Billy, good game. Frank, good game. Jerry, great game. Atta boy. Which would you rather be? Would you rather go to the spiritual world, a level of spiritual world where God says, good game, nice play? Or would you rather hear God say at the time of leaving your body, like Bhishma Dev, well done, my good and faithful servant. You finished your race. You broke the tape. And I'm here waiting for you with open arms. Congratulations, you are truly a worthy son of your Father. Those who have unflinching faith in the Supreme Lord as one's proprietor, as one's friend and master, that is the natural condition of eternal life. It's not an artificially, it's not something that's adopted. It's not that devotees are trying to be selfless in order to get to the spiritual world. It is a fact that as you become purified, your crutches, your dependency on anything other than the Supreme Personality of God, all that atrophies, Example is given in the 11th canto of the Bhakti Parishno Virakta Ranyatra Chaishatrika Eka Kalaha Prapadya Manasham Nashnuta Tushti Pushti Nushnatiro Payaham. As you eat and you get nourishment, you get strength, and you get pleasure from the food, you gradually develop detachment from your hunger. You feel that the hunger with which you approach the meal, the more that you eat the meal, that hunger, that feeling of weakness, that feeling of discomfort is replaced by a feeling of satisfaction, by a feeling of strength, and by a feeling of pleasure. Similarly, as you advance in devotional service to the Lord under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master, the material weakness, the material dissatisfaction, and the material disorientation, the material miseries, they gradually become simply memories of the past. By serving the Lord, it's our eternal nature to act as servants. Like water is wet, sugar is sweet, chilies are hot. We are Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhu Kada Nai Shravanada Suti Kori Hoja. We are constitutionally servants of the Lord, constitutionally 100% dependent upon the Lord, and constitutionally at our most happy and most satisfied when we're on behalf of the Lord, preaching the gospel of Krishna consciousness, bringing souls back home, back to God. We are most happy when we are in a condition of absolute dependence on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And of all the living entities which have expanded from the form of the Lord throughout millions and millions of universes, those are special to the Lord, who are completely dependent upon his mercy, his protection, his guidance. He himself says, Yasha deve para bhaktir, yata deve tata guru, tashayati katati arta prakasati mahatmanaham. There is nothing comparable to the Lord personally taking charge, personally overseeing the activities of the devotees, the fruits of yogic practice, the fruits of study of the scripture, the fruits of mental speculation, the fruits of giving in charity, the fruits of sacrifice. None of them can even remotely compare to the benefit of having taken shelter and having been accepted under the shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. To have had your life, your actions and your thoughts dominated by, guided by, and illuminated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate perfection of the human form of life. Tesham evanu kampartam aham agyanam nisyami atmabasho gana dishbina bhashvata. The Lord exists like a flame within the heart of every living being. And when the flame from outside, the flame of the spiritual master, begins to speak to the prospective disciple, and the prospective disciple accepts the words of the spiritual master with openness, with inquiry, and willingness to serve, then the Lord from within the heart blazes up. He waxes from within the heart, and he begins to take over the activities of the living being in such a way that the living becomes perfect in service of the Lord. So those injections from the outside, from the lips of the bona fide spiritual masters, are like the injections of vaccine. They're like the mouthfuls of food, which at one and the same time banish misery, banish weakness, banish suffering, and replace that with satisfaction, with strength, with bliss, with fullness. And the difference, of course, between eating a meal is that as one eats the meal itself, one becomes less and less attracted to the meal. The more one feels satisfaction, the less one feels hunger. The difference between this material example and the actual fact, the actual experience of devotional service, is that the more you eat, the more you hunger for more of that foodstuffs. It's an ever increasing process. The more devotional service you do, the more you want to do devotional service. The more you do devotional service, the more you pray to the Lord, please keep me as an atom at your lotus feet. Don't deprive me at any point of devotional service. Bring it on, Lord. Bring it on. Bring it on. This is the effect of the injections. This is the effect of the foodstuff, which is administered by the pure devotees to the prospective disciple. And therefore, it's imperative, stressed in many places, many times. Do not hear from non-devotees. Do not hear from professional men who repeat the activities and pastimes of the Lord only for their own selfish gain. The difference between hearing from selfless devotees and hearing from selfish devotees is like the difference between day and night. The selfless devotees are themselves already liberated souls, already denizens of the spiritual world. The words they speak have nothing to do with this material world. The words which tumble out of their mouths are coming directly like a waterfall, like a cascade from the spiritual world. Those words are the words which are going to extract us from association with matter, from being conditioned and bound up hand and foot by the modes of the material nature. Mamcha vichara bhakti sagunam samatichaitam brahma boya kalpite. The words and the service in the lotus feet of the representatives of the Lord are such that one never again has to be affected, never again has to be conditioned by the three gunas, the modes of material nature. One becomes progressively more happy, more strong in spiritual life, and more free from suffering. So the difference between eating an ordinary meal and eating the food stuff, which comes through the ear into the heart in the form of the words of the pure devotees, is that one becomes increasingly more and more and more and more attracted to the service of the Lord. There's a verse in the third canto, the Srimad Bhagavatam. It says, Kashtvam tunadita tirta parabo shatushu yashurabo yadam. It says that how can anyone achieve satisfaction by doing any other thing or by hearing any other thing than about the activities, pastimes, glories, name, fame, form, and paraphernalia of the Lord who is Tirtha Pada. That Lord who people travel hundreds and thousands of miles to arrive at a Tirtha, a place where the Lord enacted a particular pastime. That Lord comes at your beck and call when you're hearing from pure devotees, when you're serving pure devotees. Is it any wonder then that those on the path of pure devotional service, hearing from the authorized sources, gradually lose interest in all material things in favor of devotional service of the Lord? And those who some or other are unfortunate enough not to be attracted to the topics of the pastimes and paraphernalia of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, those by default fall down into this material world. They by default misidentify themselves as independent of the Lord's guidance, the Lord's protection. This is the root cause of all their troubles. Whereas the devotees are busy and increasingly have an appetite for reviving the consciousness of Krishna by hearing about him and associating with the devotees. Those who have not got that interest, who are not so fortunate, their option is to misidentify with this material body. And beginning with the misidentification with this material body, one loses all of one's spiritual qualities. One loses strength, one loses happiness, one loses pleasure. All those things become strangers to those who, due to misfortune, have no attraction for hearing about the glorious pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We'll end there. It's time, 13 minutes past 8 o'clock. And thank you, John Malik, for joining us here on Facebook, as you do almost every day. Another consistent participant is Bhakta Gary. Thank you very much, Bhakta Gary. Bhai Bhavi says, bring it on, quoting us. Sundari Priya, thank you very much for joining us. Rakesh Raghava, Satya Narayan Vashishta, Hare Krishna, Jean, as well as Brent and Manasa Ganga. Some words for us, Rob, are you there?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. I do have some words.
Hare Krishna.
Hey, Cal, you sound full of vim and vigor this morning.
Yes, we've both been listening. So the ones that I have are Krishna knows every why, every truth, and every lie. It's just as good to be with a pure devotee when you leave your material body. Love all your days for Krishna's praise. Live all your days for Krishna's praise.
I like it. I like it.
To be accepted at Krishna's lotus feet is the greatest transcendental treat.
Everything reflects exactly the points that we were making during the talk. Congratulations to you for being a good listener. It's the main qualification for success in devotional service. And you too, Kalji. You too, Cal. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Okay. You guys going to swing by this week?
I don't think I'll be able to swing by with him, but I'll be by on Tuesday.
Okay. All right. We'll see you tomorrow then. And we'll see all of you, or at least we'll see you on that Facebook side panel tomorrow. Thank you very much for having been with us. Motivational Monday. We talked about the selflessness of the pure devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.